Hello and welcome to this lecture. And in this lecture we will go ahead and learn how to pass database data to templates. So in the previous lecture we have already rendered this template right here, and right now we are going to pass in the database data, which is the item list, to this particular template. So let's learn how exactly can we do that. So the first thing which you need to do here is that you need to go ahead and pass in the context, and the context is nothing but this particular objects right here which we have extracted from the item model. So in order to pass that as context, you simply type in item list, and you need to actually include it in single quotations and a colon, and again then just type in item list. So this basically means that we are passing item list as item list. Now make sure that you have the comma at the end, or else this context is not going to work fine. And now you just need to go ahead and pass in the context over here, and we have already passed in the context here in the previous case. So now once the context is passed in here, the next thing which you need to do is that you need to go ahead and make use of that past context right over here. So what I will do here is that I will just go ahead and get rid of all this code right here just to avoid confusion, and we are only going to have the template code in here instead of the entire HTML file. So now let's go ahead and make use of this context so that we can display items right over here. Now if you have a look at this particular item list here, this item list is nothing but the list of all the items which we have over here, or the list of all the item objects. Now in order to loop through a particular list in Python, we use a for loop. So we are going to follow the same exact approach in Django as well. That is, we are going to use a for loop over here, but in Django you just cannot directly go ahead and write a for loop. Instead, you have to write a for loop using the template syntax. So in template syntax, whenever you want to write a for loop, first of all you have these curly braces, and within these curly braces you have the %sign. Make sure that you have a space in here, and here you can start writing your for loop. So you can write something like for item, and we actually want the item from the item list, so we type in item underscore list. So now once we have this loop, we also need to make sure that we end this loop. So we again use the same syntax over here, and we end the loop by typing in end for. And now once we have this loop, we are basically good to go. Now in here, the way in which this loop works is that it loops through each and every item in this particular item list, and that item is going to be stored in the item variable right here. And now in order to display the contents of that item, we go ahead and type in item over here. So I can type in something like item, and now in order to access the attributes of that particular object, I type in dot, and then let's say we want to access the ID of the item, I'll simply type in ID over here. And now let's say we also want to display the item name as well. I'll again go ahead and type in item dot item underscore name, and let's make sure that we have some dashes over here so that these two attributes are separated. So now once we go ahead, save the code, let's go ahead, run the server and see how this thing is going to work. So I'll just go ahead, open up the browser, let's go to the port number /food, and now as you can see, we have all of our items displayed over here, that is the item ID and the item name. So we have item ID 1, then we have the item name as pizza, we have item ID 3, we have item as burrito, and we have item ID 4, and we have cheeseburger. Now that means we have successfully passed the data, or the database data, to the templates, and we have displayed them over here. Now let's go ahead and format this thing in a little bit better way. So what we will do here is that now we will use HTML, and we will format this entire content in a much more better way. So what I can do here is that I can use an unordered list. So I'll type in UL, then I'll type in LI for the list element, and we are actually going to include this entire thing inside here. So now each one of those items and the item name are going to appear as a list item. So now if I go back and if I hit refresh, as you can see, now these items and their respective IDs are actually represented as list items, and this representation looks much more better. Now in the upcoming lectures, we are going to style them in a much more better way, but I guess this format is good enough for now. So let's actually go ahead and learn how exactly we have passed those items in the template and use them. So the first thing which you need to do is that you need to create a context, and the context is nothing but whatever things you have obtained from the database. So in this case, we have actually queried the database using item.objects.all, and we have stored those objects in the item list. Now we have passed the same item list as the context over here, and whenever we want to render the template, we always pass in the context. So that means that this context is passed into the template, which is index.html, and here we simply go ahead and make use of this context. So we already have the context as item list, so we simply go ahead, loop through all the objects in the item list, and we use the template syntax for doing that, and hence we get access to each individual item over here. Now when we have access to each individual item, we simply go ahead and extract its ID and its name. Now you can also go ahead and extract the other properties as well, but for now we are just extracting the ID and the item name. And finally, we actually put this thing up in an unordered HTML list so as to make it look better, and hence we get the final result. And now one more interesting thing which you can do here is that instead of returning the HTTP response, you can also directly go ahead and render this template. So for example, right now, as you can see, we have returned the HTTP response, and inside that we render this template. Now we can simply go ahead, get rid of this entire thing, and instead what we can do is that we can type in render, and then in this particular render you can pass in the request. So you just pass in request, and then you need to type in the path for the template. So the template path is actually defined over here, which is food/index.html. So you can simply just copy that, paste it up over here, and then you finally need to pass in context over here. So you type in context, and you should be good to go. So now this thing is going to just work fine. So with this, you no longer need to use this template right here, so you can simply go ahead and get rid of that. So I'll simply delete that. But the only thing which you need to make sure while using render is that you need to import render. So here render is actually imported already, so it says from django.shortcuts import render. And now if you go back, as you can see, this thing is going to still work fine. So using the render function directly is an efficient way to render your templates. You don't have to go ahead and use HTTP response and then pass in render to it. So that's it for this lecture. Hopefully you guys were able to understand how to pass context to a template so that we can display the database data into the template. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.